Most of the philosophical and spiritual traditions in human history, they build towards a conclusion. And mostly that conclusion is a God. And sometimes that conclusion can be a truth or a state. And then there is the philosophy of non duality that doesn't build towards anything. In fact, it does the opposite. It demolishes everything. And in demolishing everything, it uses language to show language's own limit. And today we are going into that territory. And I spent years trying to decode this lofty intellectual talks of Nisargadatta, Ramana, Upanishads, J. Krishnamurti. And with time, my understanding, intellectual understanding, became very sharp. My questions became very precise. But underneath all of that, there was still suffering. There was still aching for that oneness. There was still longing for the truth. And I believe that the right understanding of these concepts, of what all these teachers talk, would somehow close this gap between what I understand and the final realization. And the gap, unfortunately, didn't close with time. It refined itself. It became even more intellectually refined. And this is where the understanding of what Advaita is trying to do, or what non duality, or what Nisargadatta is trying to point at, is very, very important. The system is not designed to provide you answers. This system is designed to dissolve the questioner. The pointing that Advaita does, or even many of the Zen traditions do, instead of describing the truth, it removes what is false. It does not build a new belief system. It just dismantles the old one concept at a time. It's like, peeling an onion piece by piece. And then you come to the center. And what happens when you've discarded all the peels? There's nothing. Nothing is left. The onion is no more there. The center is nothing, zero. It was just peels all along. Advaita starts with a very simple premise. All these teachers have started with a very simple premise. First, you are not the thoughts. Thoughts come and go. You can observe the thoughts, so you're not the thoughts. So the first layer is discarded. Then they say you're not the emotions. Emotions are like guests. You sometimes feel happy, then you feel sad. So, of course, you cannot be emotions. So the second layer is discarded. Then they come to the body. They say, you can observe the body. Since you can observe it, you're separate from it. Then the body is discarded. Then it starts getting more subtle. Then what is left if I discard my body, my emotions, my mind, and my thoughts? Then what is left is the witness, the observer. And many systems stop there. They rest with the observer, which is unattached, which is vast, which is unmoving. But the Nisargadatta says, no, look closer. Since the observer can be perceived, can be known, it is still an object arising in awareness. What is that awareness? So you are not even the witness. And this is where language and mind starts collapsing. So it comes to a point, what Nisargadatta has said, whatever you have understood, you are not. So if I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I'm not the witness, and I'm whatever I have understood, if I'm not that, then what am I? Now, at this stage, any concept that you think of, or the mind can come up and say, this is what I am, is negated. Because the first saying is, you're not this and you're not that. So if I'm not this and if I'm not that, then what is this language which is being used to point at? So if you see, language has an object and a subject. And it is a structure built entirely on subjects pointing at objects, on positions that require other positions to exist. But this state, this absolute reality that all of them were trying to point at, they were not kind of describing it, because the only way they were describing it is again in negation. So if you read any of these texts, they say it is timeless, it is spaceless, it is changeless, it is without attributes. You see, all these are negative terms: changeless, attributeless, spaceless, timeless. So they were trying to point at it, not describe it, because you can only have subject and object when you're using language. And what they were trying to describe is the very ground, the very source of object and subject. And that's why their language was very confusing. Even if you read J. Krishnamurti, he says the observer is the observed. Now, when I first read it, it made no sense. And it didn't make any sense even after 10, 15 years when I read it again. Of course, I read it many times, and every time it was like a koan, a question mark. Observer is the observed. What does it even mean? What is choiceless awareness? Now, the language or the way they said things became a bit paradoxical or abstract or mystical or confusing, is again because they were trying to point at something which language could never capture. The people who wrote this philosophy, the ancient sages and the modern mystics, they were not retreating from intellectual difficulty in pointing to it. They were very sharp. They had seen the truth firsthand. And they started thinking, how can we express it? How can we show the limit of language itself? because whatever they were pointing at, it stood beyond the limits of language. And so Nisargadatta said, whatever you can think of about the absolute is a concept. It is not that. And with this sentence, again, he demolished any kind of conceptual understanding of that final reality. Now, many of you in the group would have read I Am That. I read I Am That hundreds of times. There was a time when I could quote most of the words from I Am That verbatim. Now, if you have read I Am That, the cover of the book, the name is I Am That. But if you go through the book, most of the places Maharaj says, you are not this, you are not that. Though the book cover says I am that, the content of the book says what you are not, which again is a beautiful paradox. Throughout the book, Maharaj says, you're not this. Whatever you can think of is not the truth. Don't grasp it with words, don't grasp it intellectually. Step beyond, go to the source, the awareness itself from where all concept arises. And Raman Maharishi sat on the other spectrum. He said most of the time that this finality cannot be described by words because it has no attributes. So in Sanskrit, there's a word called Nirguna Brahma. Nirguna means without any qualities and without any attributes. Brahman means this infinite consciousness. So the word means this consciousness or this infinite totality with absolutely no attributes or qualities to it. Since it has no quality, of course, language cannot describe it. And then they wrote hundreds of books trying to point towards it. And even Nisargadatta said this, it was very beautiful. I think it's in one of, I don't remember which book, but he said, though no words can describe that, my talks are only about that. And so, even though language or mind or concepts are not able to point to that, then what do? You create a system of negation. You start saying what that thing is not. And that's what Nisargadatta and other teachers came up with. It's called the whole one branch of Advaita, which is called the base teaching is Neti Neti. Not this, not this. And Shankaracharya has written a complete verses on it. It's called Atma Shatakam, where he goes systematically with saying what I am not. And he includes everything. I'm not relationships. I'm not the parent. I'm not the son. I'm not the sister. I'm not the brother. I'm not the body. I'm not male. I'm not female. None of these attributes are mine. What I am is that shining consciousness. And then Maharaj goes a step beyond and says, you're not even that shining consciousness. That is also a concept. Please let go of it. And then the seeker gets very confused. They say, okay, we had something to hang on to. We had a concept, a thought. We figured it out. Maybe I'm that vast awareness, infinite. And then you come along and you cut that concept and says, I'm not even that. Then who am I? And that question itself leads you back to the source. The source from where mind arises, the source from where language arises, and that's why language cannot describe it, because language itself is a product of it. And from that source, this entire universe manifestation arises. And that source is not different from what you are. And that is the truth which all these mystics, again, I'm saying they try to point at, not describe it, but point at it in different ways. And that's what I'm trying to do every Wednesday and whenever we meet together, to directly point to that infinite true natures of your, which is beyond words, timeless, spaceless, which has no beginning and end because it contains both. And it is timeless because it gives birth to time. It is spaceless not because it is infinite, because infinite is again a word. It is spaceless because it itself gives birth to space. And that is what we all are.